Hi, everyone. I feel like I'm back in class. So we're not rolling yet, right, Bob? Oh, we are rolling. Okay, so we're live. So welcome, everyone. This is the District Communications Committee. Today is Thursday, August 19th, and this is the first time we've all been in the same room together in close to 2 years. So it is great to see you here. If you don't have a table with a microphone, I'm going to have someone pass you a microphone or step to a microphone, because I think it's important that we just go around and introduce ourselves just so everyone knows who's in the room. In 2 years, things change. And so whether it's someone from the select board or FinCom or school committee, I think it'd be great to go around and just introduce ourselves so everyone's aware of who's in the room. So I'll start off. I'm Brian Forget, Superintendent of Triton Regional School District.
I'm Kyle Warren, School Business Administrator.
So on your microphone, you have a button. If you press it, it'll turn green, and then you're live.
Tracy Blaze, Newbury Town Administrator.
Paul Myatt, School Committee, Newbury.
Paul Goldner, Newbury School Committee.
Maureen Heffernan, School Committee.
Alicia Greco, Newbury Select Board Chair.
Joe Perry, Raleigh, Selectman.
Hunter, Salisbury School Committee.
Narissa Wallen, School Committee.
Ronnie Ray Parrott, Salisbury Select Board.
Chuck DeKeesian, Salisbury Selectman.
Neil Harrington, Town Manager, Salisbury.
Freeman Condon, Salisbury Selectman.
Linda Lukowski.
Erica Jacobson, Newbury Finance Committee Chair.
Aaron Berger, School Committee.
Alan McCray, Middle School Principal.
Jeff Walker, Newbury Select Board.
Wilma McDonald, Salisbury Board of Selectmen.
Great to see you, Wilma. And Patrick Kelly, high school principal. Sorry, just coming back. So the purpose of this evening, we have with us tonight Kevin Preventure from Habib and Associates. We went down the path of assessing this campus and looking at the repairs that are needed. Just for some history, obviously Kevin's going to go into greater detail on the building, but this building is now original building, about 55 years old. A renovation project was completed late 90s and completed around 2000 for the building that we have today, where the middle school was added and the rest of the building was somewhat renovated. So the purpose of tonight is a start to the discussion. Obviously, if anyone has paged through the report at all, there are some big numbers in here. These are not solutions we come to easily. And so the hope for tonight is, with all of us present, school committee, select board members, finance committee members, is to have the engineer here who completed this assessment, obviously with a larger team, to ask the questions. Obviously, Kevin will go through a presentation, an overview of the report. But then as he's going, do you prefer questions at the end or as you're going? Do you have a preference?
Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah, I think we can take a few questions as we're going, but we should probably save most of them to the end.
Okay. So we'll try and keep the questions to the end, but then while we have Kevin here with us, ask all the questions we can think of. And then obviously the District Communications Committee has a lot of conversations to be had as to how we will go about solving these problems. So there are, we can look at this as a piecemeal, repairs that need to be made year over year, capital planning, or we can partner with the MSBA for some type of program that would allow a partnership, likely half of the payments. So those are two very different pathways, but those are in essence the two pathways we have: funding this on a year-by-year basis, doing individual repairs as we go, or a larger project, which is what would allow us to partner with the MSBA. So not to even have that discussion tonight, but just to lay that out as far as what we see as the next step and where we go from here. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and then we'll take questions as we go throughout the presentation. So just to confirm, this is being streamed live, so just in case you need to know that.
Thank you, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Kevin Preventure. I'm an architect, and I am the Worcester Office Director for Habib and Associates Architects. And we performed the facility assessment on this building, the high school, and the middle school. We've done a number of these reports over the years, and we have some pretty good experience. And my goal for tonight is to give you what I'll call a high altitude overview of the assessment. So I see that you all have a copy in front of you. We're not going to flip through it page by page. There's a lot of detail in there, but what I'll try to do is to explain how the report was generated, what the process was, and then we're going to look at some of the highest priority items here that need to be addressed. We're not going to look at every crack, every blemish. That's really not the point of the exercise. And the result is we're going to come up with some costs that have been estimated for how to address some of these issues. And those costs are applied over a period of time. So there's escalation involved as we go from year to year. So depending on when a particular item is addressed, it will likely cost more down the line, and that depends somewhat on what's happening in the economy. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. So this process is it's a team effort. We depend on a lot of input from the school district, and in this case, Brian and his team participated at a high level, so we were able to get a lot of really good information. And I think the key person was Chris Walsh, who's the manager of facilities and grounds, and we spent quite a bit of time with Chris.
Can I just add, Chris was going to be here. He had a medical situation and wasn't able to join us. So he is, obviously, you all know Chris is deeply invested in this campus and in this building. So sends his regrets that he couldn't come tonight, but obviously.
Thank you for mentioning it.
You
I'm
spent,
sorry.
yeah. Kevin spent the most time with Chris,
We spent
obviously.
a lot of time together, and but it's important to mention because people like Chris and his team are the people that really understand what the issues are here and what the priorities are. And so we're very appreciative of that level of participation. It's not something that happens with every school district. And so the higher level of participation that we get, the better results we get in the report. I thought that was important to mention. So make sure you let Chris know. Okay. So my role was the project manager to put the assessment together, but we also work with a very experienced team of consulting engineers, GGD. I think they've actually done some work here in the district, and they certainly have extensive experience working within the Massachusetts public school system. And so our team was able to spend a day here with Chris, and then we returned, I think, on at least 2 occasions after that to do some follow-up work. PM&C is a professional cost estimator. They were added to the team just recently, and Brian alluded to this. But we started this exercise back in October of 2019 and produced the report, I believe, we delivered it in December of the same year. But then, because of the circumstances over the last year and a half, we were not able to address it at this level here as a presentation, and so we postponed that several times. But what's happened during that time period, and I think it's important to mention this, is the construction industry right now is upside down. And what I mean by that is we're seeing huge cost escalation in the construction market. There are material shortages due to factories shutting down during COVID. And although things are coming back online, material costs are very, very high. There's long lead times for ordering items and equipment. And a lot of the bids that we've seen recently are coming in very high, and on some small projects, unfortunately, as much as double the estimated cost. So we felt that it was important, because a couple of years have passed here and we have some unusual circumstances, that we should add a cost estimator to the team to supplement the work that my team has done in doing the estimates. And they bring a high level of expertise to the numbers. They validate our numbers, but they're also much more in touch with what's actually happening in the industry right now. And so that accounts for a lot of the escalation that you'll see in the cost between the original draft and what we're going to look at here tonight. So I'll try to describe the process a bit. The purpose of the exercise is simply to describe the physical conditions at the school. And then we're going to make some recommendations about which items should be addressed first and which items can be deferred until a later time. We'll prepare budget estimates on how much we think those items may cost. And the goal is that the data that we generate in the report will support development of a long-range capital plan for the district. So I mentioned earlier that we depend highly on the facilities directors, superintendent. We tour the building, we make observations. We don't open the door to every closet. We don't look at every square foot of the school, but we make some general observations about things that we see that are consistent throughout the facility and things that should be a high priority. The deficiencies that we'll talk about and that we observe are mostly related to the age of the building, how heavily it's used, building technology such as the building equipment that may have become obsolete. We look at life cycle costs, which is the cost of an item over a period of time that it takes to purchase and operate and maintain. And also, we try to consider what current learning practices might be in education. So we group the work items into one of 4 different scope categories. Scope number 1 being the highest priority. And those are the items that need to be addressed immediately. We consider these to be critical items, and they're the things that will be a safety hazard potentially, or they're simply just going to continue to deteriorate over time if nothing is done. So these are the most important items that we want to address. Scope 2 items are items that are necessary to fix, but they're not quite yet at the critical stage. So there is some deferment there that can happen, but they will need to be addressed at some point in the near future, or they will continue to deteriorate and ultimately fail. The Scope 3 category are things that are not necessarily broken, but that we would recommend being addressed because they'll be an overall improvement to the building systems and the facility overall. Scope 4 is a special category that we have for items that are not necessarily failing, but because of the age of the building, they may not meet the building codes for new construction that we have today. The codes do change over time. It doesn't mean that there's anything to do right now, but if we were to undertake a major renovation or build an addition, there are cost thresholds which will trigger improvements in two areas in particular that are required by code, and those are handicap accessibility and sprinkler protection. Sprinkler protection is not an issue here. The building is fully sprinklered. There are parts of the building, especially in the older section, that are not accessible. And so if we spend a significant amount of money, and again, those cost thresholds are defined by the accessibility regulations, we will be obligated to make other improvements to handicapped accessibility. There's something to keep in mind. We didn't find much to put in this category. So that might be a little bit hard to read, but we break the work items that we've identified down into 7 basic categories. The site category consists of everything outside of the walls of the building. So that's the grounds, the pavement, the walkways, the stairs, handrails, basically everything outside of the building, parking areas, of course. The building envelope is the name that we give to the exterior walls and the roof and everything that they contain. So that would include windows and doors. The interiors is pretty self-explanatory, but it's mostly focused on finishes. So floor finishes, wall finishes, ceiling finishes, all things that we look at as we walk through the building. The mechanical category is, some people might know this as the HVAC, or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning category. 5 is electrical, which is fairly self-explanatory, but it does include the fire alarm systems, lighting, communication systems, things like the clock system, paging, security, and so forth. Fire protection is the sprinkler system, and any pumps that may be associated with that. I don't believe we have a fire pump in this building. And plumbing is, as we all know, is water, sanitary drainage, plumbing fixtures, toilets, sinks, and so forth. So how to read the assessment. So this is a bit of a tutorial, if you will, on how to interpret this. So at the top of the slide, you'll see an excerpt from the assessment. It's the first item in the assessment, item number 1.1. And the first column is a description of a work item. This is something that has been identified as a deficiency and needs to be addressed. This one happens to be replace the paving and curbs at the parking areas and walkways. So there's an explanation there that the paving is cracked, deteriorated, standing water, issues that we need to deal with. The next column is the quantity, so that is the amount of material that needs to be replaced, and in this case it's 24,000. And the next column, the SY, is square yards. That's our unit of measure. So the third column, the unit cost, is the dollar value per the unit. In this case, it's square yards. So bituminous paving costs $40 a square yard. And then we simply just do the arithmetic, and that gives us a total value for this work item of $960,000. We then add 30% on top of that. And that is the column with the header that says total with soft costs. And soft costs are all of the costs associated with doing construction outside of the construction material and the labor itself. So it's the architect, the engineer, there's contingency in there. So we always carry a contingency in our estimates for things that are not anticipated in construction and not anticipated in design. And During construction, those contingencies turns into change orders. So those are things that were not anticipated. So we put a pretty healthy margin on top of that number. And then the scope categories, you see they're listed scopes 1 through 4. So we'll make a determination, and this is in consultation with the district, on where that particular work item belongs. And so in this case, we've determined that some of that pavement is in worse shape than the other areas. And so we've put a portion of that, a small portion, in scope 1. So that's something that really needs to be addressed right away. And I believe this is the entry drive is in pretty rough shape. So that portion was placed in scope number 1. The remaining of the paving, less critical, but still needs to be addressed, that was put in scope number 2. So the totals that you see here are simply just the sum of those items. But at the end of the report, and we'll look at this further down the line, we apply 4% inflation, which is compounded per year. And this is typically what we see year to year on average. This year, as I mentioned earlier, who knows where it's going. We're hoping that things will start to settle down and equalize, perhaps early next year, but that remains to be seen, and something that we'll be monitoring closely. But if the work item is in scope number 1, which is our highest priority, that's something that we want to address within 2 years. If it's in scope number 2, we want to address it in that same time period, but perhaps after we address the items in scope number 1. If it's in scope number 3, it's something that should be considered to address within the 2 to 5 year period and beyond. And scope number 4 is, we really don't know when those work items might be required. It depends on whether or not the district chooses to do a large-scale construction project. But we might expect that to be in the 5 to 10 year category. So just a little orientation here on the building. I'll stay closer to the mic. Brian mentioned earlier that the original building, which we're standing in tonight, it was completed in 1971, and then there were a series of additions and renovations that were performed that were completed in the year 2000. So we started off with over 200,000 square feet, and with the additions added another 72,000 square feet. So the total gross area of this building is over 286,000 square feet. So this is a pretty good size school, one of the bigger ones that we've looked at. There's certainly bigger schools out there, but as you can see from the geometry of the building in the drawings, it's a very complex building. It has a complicated facade, a lot of angles. There's some interior courtyards, one of which is just outside the window here. So there's a lot of surface area that we need to look at. And the color coding is simply just to show you what parts of the building are original and what parts have been added to. So now let's get into some of the work items. We'll start with scope number 1, our highest priority items. We'll start with roofing. Roofing is a big issue here. You can see in the images that we're getting a lot of ponding, which is that water that you see that won't drain. The roof is over 20 years old, and it's just about the end of its useful life. There are several active and ongoing leaks in the building which are being managed, but leaks don't stop until they're fixed. And so we would clearly recommend replacing the roofing in its entirety. And as you can see, those are some pretty big numbers, probably almost 10 million there between the two sections of the building. Also, up on the roof, we have a lot of our mechanical equipment. So this is the equipment that provides heating, ventilation, and cooling. This equipment is also just about the end of its useful life. They're becoming increasingly expensive to maintain. The type of refrigerant that's used in some of the units is being phased out because of its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Units are not being manufactured with that type of refrigerant anymore. And the units are not nearly as efficient as a new unit that we could engineer today. The technology has evolved quite a bit. You can also see on the image on the left that there's some ductwork that runs across the roof. There's quite a lot of this. And that ductwork should be insulated to keep that thermal energy inside that duct where it belongs so it can be delivered to the spaces below. But that insulation has completely failed. In some cases, it's just gone. And in other cases, as you can see there, it's falling apart and crumbling. So there's a lot of energy that's being wasted here. I group these with the roof, and the roof drain falls into this category as well, because it's often cost effective if it's affordable to address replacement of the rooftop mechanical units at the same time as replacing the roofing membrane. And the reason why is because in order to flash things properly, what we want to do is temporarily take those units off of their curbs, put the membrane in properly, and then put the unit back on. But of course, that costs money. So if it is affordable in the budget, what we recommend is to consider replacing those units at the same time of the roof. Altogether, that's going to save you money. Other Scope 1 items, the egress doors around the perimeter of the school are in pretty rough shape. A lot of them are rusting. They're not weather tight. They leak constantly. They're causing damage to the interior just beyond the threshold where it's affecting the floor. On the right side, this is an image of a lever handle on a classroom door. And we would strongly recommend considering replacing this hardware with new security function lock sets. So these are the types of locks that can be locked from inside the classroom if there were an emergency happening, like an active shooter out in the hallway. Any new school would be specified with locks like that. These locks, unfortunately, cannot perform that function. More exterior items, these are in the 1971 portion of the building. The image on the left is in one of the courtyards. I have a little magnifying glass. There it is. So you could see those concrete stairs are almost gone, just from weathering. And all of those need to be replaced. There are handrails on the exterior as well. These are made of galvanized metal. Even galvanized metal eventually will fail if it's scratched, especially. But these handrails are failing as well. This is a potential safety issue. In this particular image, this post right here is just separated completely and is just hanging there in the breeze. Not a safe condition. Concrete in general, there's a lot of concrete on the 1971 part of the building, which was not unusual for buildings that were built at that time. But it does not weather well in areas where we need to remove snow and ice. So those de-icing salts really wreak havoc on the concrete, but we can't stop using them because we need our walkways and stairs to be safe. But unfortunately, this is the result. The loading ramp here is very badly deteriorated. The loading dock is also in pretty rough shape. Other areas on the exterior in our Scope 1 category on the left is the pylon that we all pass when we come here to the entrance to the school. That has a glazed concrete block, which is that blue color. There's a lot of water infiltration in this pylon, and so it's basically rotting from the inside out, and the blocks are starting to crack and spall and to fall off. And that really either needs to be removed if it's not needed or replaced in its entirety. Windows are a very big issue, and as you can see, based on the quantity of windows that we have, a costly item as well, almost $3 million. The original building was built with steel frame windows, so you can see the rust developing there on the frame. I believe this room has those type of windows. When the school was renovated and added to in 2000, all of the glazing was replaced in the windows. Originally, they were single pane windows, and they were replaced with double pane in an attempt to make them more energy efficient. The frames were never really intended for that, and unfortunately, they're starting to fail. The seals around the perimeter are failing. The seal between the double glazing is also failing. And in a lot of places, you'll see, in this image here, you'll see the condensation forming there on the inside of the glass. And that's not going to go away. It will only continue to get worse over time. It's important to mention that there's a lot of energy also being lost through these windows, so there's some potential cost savings on operating costs over the long term to do a window replacement with more efficient windows. More items on the exterior, more concrete. There's a lot of it. We have some issues with some of the stairs out in the parking area where the treads are starting to crumble and fall apart, potential safety issue. Handrails are in rough shape as well. Some of them are missing components or detached or rusting badly and about to detach. Here's that paving that I mentioned. This is on the entry drive coming in. You can see that it's pretty badly cracked, and that's an important area. It really needs to be repaved. Near the main entrance to the high school, there's a very large courtyard that has a concrete paving on it, and that is deteriorating as well. This was one of the items I remember that Chris was particularly concerned about because it's very difficult to maintain, but we need to keep the area clear of snow and ice, during the winter months because it's a safety issue. But as you can see, what's happening here is it's simply just falling apart. So now we'll look at some of the Scope 2 items. So these are items that do need to be addressed, but are perhaps less urgent than the items in Scope number 1. But we would recommend that these items be addressed, if possible, within a 2-year period. More paving. This paving is not as badly damaged as the paving in Scope 1. I think this image is in the rear parking lot. Is that where the students park? I think so, yeah. This is starting to go as well. It's got a little bit of life left in it, but it will need to be replaced eventually. The pad underneath the compactor clearly is almost gone. Near the main entrances, these canopies were added when the renovations were performed and the middle school was built completed in 2000. So there are these steel canopies near the gymnasium entrance and the entrance to the middle school that are painted, but the paint is failing. and they're starting to rust, and this is a pretty widespread problem that needs to be addressed. The older portion of the building, lots of concrete. Once there's a crack that forms there, water gets in, starts to freeze, and it starts to pop that concrete right off the face of the building. This is an example of what we call a spall, an area where water has gotten in there and frozen, pushed the concrete out, and you can see there's a reinforcing bar there that's become exposed. You might see this on a highway bridge, by the side of the road. It's the same issue. Around the windows, and the image on the right these are aluminum windows that are a part of the middle school addition. All of these windows have a seal around the entire perimeter of the window frame. There's a lot of it. Those sealants generally start to fail after about 20 years. We're just about there. That will continue to get worse over time, and eventually those sealants should be redone. That's a pretty common maintenance item that we see in almost every building that we look at. More sealants here. These are between the brick and the concrete. These are in some places almost gone. What will start to happen at some point is that moisture will get in through that joint and get behind that brick, and as I said before, once it starts to freeze, that's when the big problems start. On the right, in the older portion of the building, a lot of the windows at the ground floor level, and we may even have that condition right out here. There are precast concrete sills. The windows, as you can see, are set back quite a ways from the face of the building, but that creates a shelf that tends to collect water, and the edges of those pieces are, as you can see, are just falling off, and here's some rusting reinforcing bar here that's been exposed. There were, in some areas of the building, there was a coating that was applied during the renovations in 2000. I'm not sure what it is, but it's clearly failing. It's cracking and falling off. We see these in the courtyards, and we see them. I know that I think at the gymnasium entrance, there's quite a bit of this as well. It's also very moldy and maybe even some algae growing in there in some of the wet areas, but that material needs to be removed in its entirety. Here's an image on the right of that glazed concrete block that we looked at before at the entry pylon. There's more of this on the middle school, and this crack that you see here, this is happening in quite a few places for the reasons that I've described before related to moisture infiltration. Some of those need to be replaced. Still in scope 2, we'll move to the interiors. Ceiling tiles, and I know that you've noticed them when you walk around the school. They're everywhere, but they're in very bad shape. They're damaged, scratched, and they do not tolerate any moisture. So if there's any level of humidity within the building, these tiles will absorb it and they'll start to sag. And that's what you see here in this image, and this is happening throughout the school. In the auditorium, it's really showing its age. The upholstery on the auditorium seating is pretty worn and frayed and starting to come off. That's something that should be considered for replacement. Sticking with the auditorium, the carpet is also in rough shape. It's pretty worn, and in some places it's simply just peeling away. And here, where it's coming off on the steps, that's a potential trip hazard. It's something that we want to address for safety. Up on the stage, the stage curtains, I I believe, are the original ones from when the building was built in 1971. But they're deteriorating as well, and the traveling curtain, which is the curtain that opens and closes at the beginning and the end of the performance, has some mechanical issues, and it's become very difficult to operate. Those should be considered for replacement as well. Toilet compartments throughout the school are starting to show their age. What typically happens with these is the fittings become loose with wear, and they get, kind of loose, and the steel underneath starts to rust, especially in the, you'll see this in every men's room that has this type of partition, but near the urinal, that area gets pretty rusted, and that's starting to happen. The locker rooms is an important item. I'm sorry I don't have a better image for this. I didn't have a good picture of the locker rooms, but the team locker rooms are really due for a major renovation. This is a big number, but keep in mind that this number includes a total renovation of the team locker room. So that includes a complete gut of the interior, new flooring, walls, ceilings, plumbing fixtures, lockers, benches, everything that goes with a complete fit up of a locker room. That's what's included in that number. And that's something that we were asked to include. Some other scope 2 items in the kitchen. We'll see a few items in the kitchen. The equipment is becoming obsolete. It's functional, but that's something that could be considered for replacement. The equipment is expensive. This estimate is this is for a total upgrade of the kitchen, close to $500,000. The air handling units, these are things that you won't see when you're walking around the building. They're in mechanical rooms or up above ceilings, but they're important pieces of the heating and ventilation system, which delivers the fresh air to the spaces in the building. These units, I believe, are original to the building, and so they're way past their useful life, and are something that should be considered for replacement, not only to maintain a high ventilation rate in the school, and I'll add, and I think you already know this, but maintaining ventilation in a school in the age of COVID is a very, very important item for health and safety. Plumbing fixtures in general are functional. They're being maintained. Some areas they don't meet the accessibility requirements. We could consider replacing some or all the fixtures with some higher efficiency units. That will reduce water consumption. It's less of a burden on the sewage disposal system, and saves on costs for water. That bathroom there on the left is not handicap accessible. It wouldn't meet any of the dimensional requirements. It's missing grab bars, pipe insulation, et cetera. The drinking fountains on the left are also not accessible to persons in wheelchairs. So now we're in scope 3. So this is the 2 to 5 year range. And we're back out on the site. So these are some of the lower priority items that should be addressed, but they're not quite as compelling as the items that we've placed in the first 2 scope categories. Chain link fencing is in need of some repair, especially in the parking area. I know this is one of the other items that Chris was especially concerned about. The parking area where we enter the site. There are a lot of furnishings out in the courtyard areas. Most of the original ones were made of wood, but they're pretty rotten and starting to splinter and fall apart. Some of the metal furnishings that were added outside of the middle school are also starting to rust. On the middle school building, there's some peculiar issues with the facade, and I would say that they're the result of some questionable design decisions, and I'm not here to criticize other architects' design decisions, but clearly there are some features here on this building that have resulted in some unexpected deterioration. So on the left side, you'll see that some of those windowsills that have been set way back from the face of the building are collecting water, and that water is simply just running down the face of the building, and it's creating mold and algae growth. You can see it collecting up in here, and that really, it needs to be cleaned off. Another item from scope 3, push plate automatic door operators. So these are the devices that you'll see sometimes at building entrances that have the plate that you hit with the palm of your hand that opens the door automatically. These are not required for accessibility, but they do make a pretty big impact for somebody who is disabled and needs to enter, especially on these exterior doors. They're quite heavy. And if there's an excessive amount of force required to open that door, it makes it very difficult for a disabled person to do that. Putting an operator on there solves that problem, but they're pricey items. And I believe the $13,000 that we had in our estimate covers the two main entrances, middle school, high school. The greenhouse, this is located in one of the courtyards, very badly deteriorated. You can see more of that mildew there that's growing. There's a lot of work that would be required to repair that. The treatment building, so this is a small outbuilding out behind the school. This school has a sewage disposal system, and the equipment that treats the sewage from the school is located inside of this this building. It does need a little bit of work. It's in pretty decent shape, but could maybe use a roof replacement, and that door there also is starting to rust. More items from scope 3, the kitchen and the ceiling. You can see that the grease is really starting to build up there on the ceiling. They should be cleaned periodically. It doesn't always happen, but replacing those tiles might be worth $54,000. Roller shades, you'll see these throughout the classrooms. They're great things to have, but over a period of time, just from heavy use, the mechanism that raises and lowers the shades, they just start to break, and these are difficult things to maintain. More finish items that could be addressed inside the school. The finishes inside the bathrooms are pretty dated. This was an item we were asked to look at to see if these could be refreshed with new finishes and new accessories. So those are the things like the toilet tissue dispensers, paper towels, things like that. So on the left is an image of the boiler plant. So the boilers are located in a small outbuilding out behind the school. These boilers are nearing the end of their useful life. A new boiler, we do a lot of boiler replacements in our firm for schools, partly because it's a project that's eligible for funding from MSBA to replace a boiler. The boilers that we're putting in schools now are 95% efficient or better, so the technology has really evolved quite a bit. If you do participate in that program, I believe it's a requirement to have a minimum of 95% efficiency. That's for the MSBA program. The unit ventilators, hard to see, but the image on the right. So you see these two units here that are in front of the windows. This is a typical mechanical unit that you'll see in classrooms in many different schools. But what it does is it brings fresh air directly from the outside, heats it, and then distributes it to the classroom. And our engineers have said that those units as well are approaching the end of their service life and could be considered for replacement. They're also very costly to maintain. They don't provide any cooling or dehumidification. That's heat only. Back to the kitchen, there's some potential energy savings by adding an exhaust control system to the hood that modulates the volume of air that's being exhausted through that hood, some potential energy savings there. The dishwasher doesn't have any exhaust, and it needs to. Every dishwasher, every commercial dishwasher needs to have an exhaust. There's a ton of moisture that gets into the air that we want to get out of the building right away. That might be worth $50,000 or close to $50,000 to add one. Electrical systems in general, we didn't find a whole lot here, so there were some things that were recommended by the engineers that we take a look at. The electric service switchgear, the image on the left, these are the devices where the power enters the building from the utility company. So this is where the interface comes from utility to the building. This equipment is original to the 1971 building. It's 50 years old. Sometimes they do fail, and when they fail, you have no power, and you're not going to have any power for quite a long time. There's no signs that there's any imminent failures here, but if the district were to undertake a major renovation, I'm talking about a significant renovation, this is one of the items that I would consider to be replaced at that time because it's a very disruptive thing to replace. The general circuits, as I said, appear to be in good condition, but we didn't have computers, we didn't have data back when the building was built. Today, of course, we have that. We have wireless access. We have computers in the classrooms. In general, what we like to see is that all of the electric circuits that service the data equipment and the computers be separated from all of the other circuits. And that allows us to monitor that for issues with power surges. It protects the equipment. The fire alarm system is perfectly functional. It's a manual system. It doesn't include every single feature that we might find in a new school, and the one in particular I'm thinking of is the recorded voice message that you would find on a new system. When the system goes into alarm, there's a message that comes on that provides instructions about what to do and where to go. That, I think, is probably a lower priority item, and again, something that might be considered if there was a very large-scale renovation where, a large portion of the school was being renovated at one time. Lighting. So we have fluorescent lighting here. Replacing it with LED, I'm sure everyone's familiar with LED technology, is a strong thing to consider for the energy savings, and also some improvement in the light quality as well. I think the fixtures themselves are able to deliver a higher quality of light than the old fluorescents. Adding an automated control system there will also enhance energy savings and allow better control from facilities. The domestic hot water heaters, the item on the right side, these are the tank. We all have them in our homes. These ones just happen to be very, very big. This is original equipment. This is what heats our hot water. But it's way past the end of its service life, and I'm surprised there hasn't been a major issue, but I've been told that there hasn't. But these can be replaced with some high efficiency units, and sometimes these are done in tandem with a boiler replacement as well. Other items, so we don't have images for these, but the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning control system, part of it is a pneumatic system which runs on compressed air. That's an obsolete technology, very difficult and sometimes not even possible to service or maintain. That's run by a compressor. What we like to see is have those systems be converted into a direct digital control system, which is monitored by a computer. It allows the facilities people to basically operate the system from a computer screen and even from a smartphone. More lighting on the exterior of the building, the poles out in the parking lots, those could be upgraded to LED. There's several of these low voltage systems that you'll find in almost any school, which are typically a security system that has intrusion alarms, key card access, closed circuit TV monitoring. The systems in this building are all separate systems, but what we would find in a new school is a platform that integrates all of these systems together. It's an open source platform that allows the integration of the security, the card swipes, the monitoring, all under one system. The building doesn't have any lightning protection. That's an investment that would protect some of the sensitive building systems. I was at Masconomet a few months ago. They had a lightning strike, and I think it destroyed their card access system, if I'm not mistaken. They had, I think that was an insurance claim, but they were able to address it. But it's a rare occurrence, but sometimes it happens. The communication system, so this is the paging and the clock system. The analog system is obsolete. A new system would be a wireless system using voice over IP. And we're using wireless, of course, throughout our schools, but we have an ever-increasing need for bandwidth, and I'm sure a lot of you experienced this if you were working with home or at home, or if you had multiple family members at home during the pandemic. I know this happened at my house where there's just not enough bandwidth to go around, and people can't get online. But one of the ways to mitigate that in a school environment is simply just to upgrade the cabling. And it's recommended to have at least 2 Category 6 cables to each wireless access point. The other cabling between the distribution frames, we would want to see fiber optic cable, higher grade of cable, to handle that volume of data. Almost to the end. The scope 4 categories, we didn't find much here, so these are the items that we would want to address if we had done a major renovation and we were obligated to correct certain code deficiencies. This would include things like having separate circuits for the life safety items, such as emergency lighting, exit signs, and so forth. The sprinkler heads, we would probably, this building is fully sprinkler. There are no issues that we're aware of, but we would probably want to see a quick response head. This is a head that will fuse faster than the typical head. It provides an added level of safety. Again, no obligation to do this at this time. So the summary. So this is the tally of all of the items in the report, and it's sorted by category, site, envelope, interiors, and so forth, and scope. So these are the summations of the estimated costs for each of these categories by scope. At the bottom of each column, what you'll see is a line that says the total inflated costs at 4% compounded annually. So depending on what scope category that you're in, we add 4% per year for that scope. And remember, scopes 1 and 2 are compounded at 2 years. Scope 3 is 5 years. Scope 4, it could be anywhere between 5 and 10 years, but we use 5 years compounded inflation for that category as well. So you can see that this adds up to some pretty big numbers. If we were to address every item in this report over the period of time that we've identified based on the scope categories, we're looking at $58 million. And does that mean that's really what it costs? And I guess the answer is it depends. We don't know what the market will do from year to year. We know that we're in a very strange time right now where things are very expensive. We're hoping that that settles down. But the general comment that I'll make is that we take a very conservative approach to these reports. We don't want to leave districts surprised by not having enough money to do the projects that they've decided to do because the estimates were too low. So they tend to be on the high side. We do add that 30% margin for contingency. And we did work closely with our cost estimator who's able to validate the unit prices that we've assigned to these cost items. So I wouldn't necessarily be intimidated by these numbers. During a time of competitive bidding where contractors are looking for work, you can do quite a bit better. I've had some projects that came in at almost half the estimated costs during a very competitive time. But that's going to obviously change over a period of time depending on what's happening in the industry. So some conclusions. Well, the intent is that the district will use this assessment to consider the goals of bringing the school up to speed with issues that need to be addressed. But our top priority should always be the classroom, I think. We always want to optimize the classroom so that we provide the best learning environment for our students. We want the safest and most secure schools that we can have, very important. We want to be able to control our life cycle and our maintenance costs to keep our operating costs down from year to year. We want to look at the building components and equipment that are obsolete and replace it with the latest available technology. We want to reduce the cost to purchase our energy, our gas, and our electricity by providing more efficient systems and new equipment. And finally, there's an opportunity, and especially if the district chooses to participate in a program such as the MSBA's core program, which is a large-scale renovation of the school. There's an opportunity here to really just transform the learning environment completely. Teaching practices have changed. Attitudes towards the configuration of the classroom have changed. We're seeing a lot more interest in flexible learning spaces, maker spaces, spaces that don't depend on having four walls, a door with the teacher at the front and the students facing the teacher. That's the traditional approach. There are other approaches to consider. But I think that if the school were able to participate with the MSBA in a program like that, and it's a long process. It takes several years to get there. There's an eligibility period. There's a feasibility study. The ideas are scrutinized very, very closely. So it takes a while to get there, but there is a good opportunity to really do some things to improve the learning environment. Some of these other items, and I'll mention three in particular: the roofing, the windows, and the boilers. These are items that could potentially be addressed also with MSBA funding through their accelerated repair program. We call it the ARP program. So those three items in particular are items that are eligible for funding. Each community has a different reimbursement rate. Some communities get more funding than others, but that's something that can be applied for. We work on a lot of these projects, roof replacements, windows, boiler replacements. We're working on several right now. Something to consider. So that's what I had. I know it's a lot. There's a lot more in the report. You've been very patient, so I think we'll probably take some questions if there are some questions. Sure. This is not a feasibility study. No, not by any means. Just excuse me one second. So a feasibility study is a much bigger effort. If you participate in one of the MSBA core programs, a feasibility study is a requirement. But it requires that several options be considered and that the highest and best option be selected. So the district is obligated to present, and it's typically, I think, up to 3 options for a renovation. This is something that you might do for a new school, or it might be something that you might do for a major renovation of a school like this one. But there is some design work that goes into that study. So there are 3 different options that might be considered that need some level of conceptual design. It doesn't go into a great deal of detail. But it is a process, and it's a much bigger effort than what we've done here tonight. What we've done here tonight is simply just to identify things that need to be fixed, that need to be addressed, or things that should be considered that may not necessarily be broken, but things that we want to consider to address because they're obsolete, or they'll provide efficiencies to the buildings and offer potential cost savings.
I was going to say, I think it's easy if you just raise hands and Kevin can call on you. He's the teacher for the moment.
I'm from Raleigh, and we've just finished up getting our last payment from MSBA on our Pine Grove School renovation. And that project was over 5 years long. And when we submitted originally, there were 95 cities and towns that were applying for MSBA grants, and only 15 were chosen. Has that changed at all?
The number of applicants will change from year to year. I know that in the most recent funding cycle, there may have been 10 or 12 projects that were funded, and that was due to the circumstances, I think, of the pandemic. But I think the point to make is that it is a competitive process. So you're not guaranteed of getting funding.
Right.
The MSBA board votes and decides which districts will be funded from year to year. And sometimes requests are partially funded. I can think of a school in particular that applied to the accelerated repair program to replace windows and the boiler system. The boiler system was funded, the windows were not. Hi.
Hi. Thank you. I have a bunch of questions, and I'm really being the devil's advocate. I'm not trying to be difficult, but as a parent, I have 2 kids. I understand how important education is. As a selectman, I have a responsibility to my entire community for costs and for expenditures. Could you tell us what it costs us for you to do this assessment?
Yes? Yeah.
It was just, I have to go back and look at it. It's paid it 2 years ago. It was around 100,000. It was no?
No, it was 60, I think it was 60.
60? Okay. I think we
I think the fee
originally.
was 60,000.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank
I
you.
can say when we approved it, we pulled 75,000 out of E&D for that, and we weren't anticipating it was going to take all of that funding.
Okay, there it is. And we paid an additional, it was about 3,500 to redo this most recent update, recost.
The cost
and
estimate
reprint.
update, yeah, that's right.
And I am assuming that all the costs we've talked about includes prevailing wage and those types of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
I had a question about the contingency, which I think you just answered, 30%, which seems a little bit high.
It's not just contingency, so there's a few things in that. It includes soft costs, so those are all of the costs for the design, the architects, engineers, other consultants that might need to participate, plus contingency.
So I guess my hard question is that you described the campus as being 286,000 square feet of building. That's almost 7 acres of building. You also described it as one of the biggest building campuses that you've dealt with.
Yeah.
At the same time, our enrollment is declining year after year after year. So if we look at the bottom line of $58 million, I'm curious, you would use the word obsolete over and over and over again when you described fire safety, when you described lighting. With the declining enrollment and the budget of $58 million, why don't we just build a new school? I mean, that's a serious question. I don't mean to be...
Yeah, it's something to consider. I mean, I think our role in this process, and Brian, you can jump in too, but our role is to try to identify items that either need to be addressed or should be considered on some level. We're not making any decisions here for the district.
I understand that, but
Yep.
my question's serious because I'll go one step further. You know, as 1/3 of the communities, our apportionment of this cost would be around $20 million. You know, we have an empty school building in town. Well, why don't I talk to the rest of the Board of Selectmen about starting our own high school? At some point, we cannot sustain the numbers that we are handed year after year after year. And Brian, you know that. And you know that I've supported this school system every year, 100% of the time.
Absolutely.
But at some point, it's not going to be sustainable anymore.
Absolutely, and this is certainly not Kevin. Kevin doesn't have to answer that question. So the purpose of this assessment was to know a high-level scope of what we're talking about.
Yep.
The next step would be to determine the critical needs, and then as 3 communities and a district, determine how best we want to address that.
Yep.
So that could be a new building. I mean, I can tell you, I live in Groveland, and it's a $200 million project. So a new building. Pine Grove, much smaller building, 90,000 square feet, $40 million. So I don't know that a new building would be that much cheaper, but this is not a proposal, I think is the key word, right? This is not a proposal to say, here's what we want, and the next step is towns figure out how to pay this. That's absolutely not the intent. It was, as Kevin said, this is not a feasibility study. This was here's what is failing and what we need to address, and let's start the conversations about how we're going to do that.
But Brian, it was an eye-opener because you look at the numbers that we've talked about. $4 million for new locker room, $182,000 to repaint the canopies. Those numbers are absurd. You know, fire protection, $2 million. New lighting, $5.5 million. At some point, we have to look at the big picture here and get all those numbers together and see where we're going to go in a realistic way.
I fully agree. It's part of the entire equation and the discussion that has to be had.
Yep.
This is just the tip of the iceberg to get the conversation going. We
Okay.
never had this level of information. As Kevin said, there were, again, not here to critique any of the decisions that were made, but either the 71 original building or the renovation done 20 years ago, there are steel windows that were just reglazed rather than replaced. We now have to address those. And obviously, this is 286,000 square feet. There's a lot of them. So it's a start of the discussion.
Yeah, you know, Brian, pictures don't lie. I saw the concrete, I saw the deterioration, I saw the windows, I saw all of those things. But as a community, as three communities, we have to decide the most prudent way to move forward here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's all.
I agree with all that. If I could just add something quickly, I like to think of these assessments as tools for decision making. Right? So it's just something there that's to assist the community in making some hard decisions about what to do about your school buildings. And maybe the conclusion that you reach at the end of the exercise is that you do need a new school. And then if that's the case, then I think it served its purpose. And that's really all it is.
Thank you.
Marissa? I guess I'm calling on people.
I just wanted to respond to what Freeman said. When we were redoing the regional agreement over the last couple of years, which is finally done, one of the key points that we could always agree on through all this was adding in the capital plan. We knew that we needed to have an idea of what needed to happen to these buildings. And I think the school committee approved the excess and deficiency, even though we don't have a lot of reserves, approved that excess and deficiency spend so we could get to this point to have this conversation. And I think it was very deliberate on the school committee's part to not see this ourselves first. We deliberately came and made sure that all the people from the towns were here. We wanted to see this with you. I hope that that comes into your frame of mind of where we're coming from in looking at what's happening here, right? This was developed out of a group endeavor with the regional agreement. The money was put forward out of excess and deficiency, right? And we're here tonight to begin these conversations.
I'm not casting aspersions as to the process. I'm just throwing things out for discussion. Where we go.
And I think that's the conversation to be had.
Hi, I have a question. Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Brian, during COVID, I believe that the district got some air exchange handlers that you brought in to address the COVID issue. Is that reflected or the line item adjusted in this, or is that something different?
So it wasn't air handlers. We did a lot of work on univents, the unit ventilators, increasing the flow in those as best we can without replacing the units. Did a lot of exhaust fan replacements. But we didn't, other than that, it was increasing, tweaking, making adjustments to the existing airflow, not necessarily replacing any of the major large ticket items that were addressed in this report.
Okay, I have a small list, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
As far as construction costs, you may not know this answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Since you're in the industry, is there any chatter about when these construction costs are expected to normalize in the industry? Is it 2 to 3 years out? Is it 3 to 5 years out?
Yeah.
I mean,
I wish I had that crystal ball, but I don't. What I have heard is that a lot of the issue has to do with availability of materials because of factories shutting down. I mean, the factories that produce the steel that we use, United States, Japan, China, they shut down completely. during the pandemic. There was no steel being produced in the world. And to bring those back online takes quite a bit of time. And that's just one example, steel. But there are many other products that were affected as well. Roofing materials, I know, is a big issue. We're being told that we can't expect to get any roofing materials until November or December. And these are for projects that were started in, May and June. So big delays. So this material supply, that will normalize, and if I had to guess, it'll start normalizing in the first quarter of next year. But one of the other issues that we're seeing is recent bids have not been competitive because there's a big demand right now for contracting services. So contractors are just flat out working, and a lot of it is because of projects that were deferred during the pandemic. Once the Commonwealth reopened, there was a big surge of demand for contracting services because now all of a sudden all these projects that were put on hold can now start. So we were just finding that it was difficult just to get contractors to bid on some of these, on small projects in particular. Lack of interest because they're busy, they don't need the work. And the ones that do bid sometimes throw ridiculous numbers out just to see if they might get the job. But so when that changes, I wish I had a better answer for you, but those are just my observations about what I'm seeing right now.
Thank you. And then one
Sure.
finally is, you showed us several different occasions that there was, the concrete was deteriorating because of the salt that we used to remove the ice and snow. Is there another product besides concrete that can be used to prevent or mitigate that deterioration, or is that just something that's a necessary evil that we have to accept?
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately part of the world that we live in here in New England. There aren't a whole lot of materials outside of that spectrum that I would consider for an environment like this. So concrete and masonry are what we typically would see for things like walkways and the large open space in front of the school. I think there are some other formulations for de-icing that they're not as effective as melting agents, but they're a little easier on the concrete. But ultimately, it's the facilities folks who have to keep these areas clear, and they're the ones that are going to be making the decisions about what products to use.
I can say we've attempted to use those other products specifically on the whole main entry, and they just don't treat it as well, unfortunately. I know this is an issue we're dealing with the entry courtyard at Pine Grove. Trying just sand or I don't know what the product is, it's twice the cost, so it doesn't deteriorate.
You had a question?
So you mentioned at the end this being an opportunity to reimagine the educational spaces, and it seems that this would be the opportune time to do something like that, looking at where education is going to be as we move forward. The presentation seemed mostly focused on repairs and all of that, which I'm sure would also improve the educational situation.
Sure.
Do you see, if we were to, just throwing it out there, if we were to accept all of this and try to do this, within that, do you see that that is an opportunity for that within this $58,000 or $58 million, I wish it was $58 million piece, or would that be something additional and beyond?
I think that's another animal. And I think that thinking came out of conversations that Brian and I had when we were wrapping up the report back in late 2019. And I think the assessment is really more of a, it's more of a cookbook. It's a recipe, and there's many items in there, and you can choose one, several, or all of them, right? And it all depends on the decisions that you make as a district. the type of transformative renovation that I was trying to describe, I think that that's more like like an MSBA core project, right? So that's a major renovation where a large portion or the entire school is taken over for construction. And so that means, temporary accommodations for students, or perhaps it's a phased approach where we take one section of the building at a time and renovate it. So, we always try to look at what's happening with school design, and there's a lot of interest right now in different types of teaching spaces that go beyond the four walls of the classroom. And when I talk about a transformative design, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about maker spaces, about, flexible learning environments, things like that.
So if I can just, to your point, Freeman, so I alluded to this at the beginning, and I can't believe it's almost been 2 years since we had those conversations. So if we round this number, 60 million, nice easy numbers, $60 million, there's no improvements in the proposal here. Let's round it down to 50, right? Because it's inflated a lot. So call it 50. It's improvements for $50 million. I'm sorry, corrections for $50 million, but no improvements. It restores things back to where they should be to be good working order. If for $100 million, we could do a renovation that achieves that, plus allows us to rethink educational spaces, improve other areas, and we partner with the MSBA and they reimburse at a 50% rate, we're spending the same $50 million and getting twice the bang for the buck. I don't know if that's a reality, right? This is the first discussion. Then we go to the feasibility stage, if that would be a commitment from the three towns to fully test a feasibility of what all the options might be. Then we get to the improvements. So I think it's going to come down to a question of, if we have to spend this money piecemeal, it's the town's money. The only things that would qualify accelerated repair would be the building envelope and boilers. Everything else is 100% borne by the towns over a 10-year, 15-year capital improvement plan. Is there a better way to do that? And is there a way that the towns end up getting more bang for the buck because the state's going to come in and contribute and look at the three towns collectively? Because this would be similar to Pine Grove, that's owned by the town of Rowley, so Rowley went through that process. This would be completely borne by the district, since it's a district-owned facility, but obviously we are the three towns, so it gets assessed to the three towns. So that's the big question. I don't know the answer to that yet, but that's where we need to go next.
So I have a few questions, but I think the first one, very briefly in the beginning, you mentioned ADA and you were talking about how the new building is okay, but the old one wasn't. In the presentation, I saw you, I think, once refer to water fountains not being low enough. Mm-hmm. What else, what other existing ADA issues did you identify as part of the assessment?
Well, it's a good question. A new facility, obviously, we would make every space accessible, every bathroom, every fountain, every classroom, every door entrance. When we have an existing building and we have spaces that are not accessible, we're not obligated under the regulation to do anything about it until we start spending money. And then once we hit those thresholds, that triggers a requirement to bring things up to code. That's the way that the Commonwealth looks at it. There's also the Americans with Disabilities Act, of course, which is a law. It's not a regulation, it's a law. And it's civil rights. So we have an obligation under federal law to make our schools accessible to persons with disabilities. So there are enough accessible elements in the building today to satisfy the requirements. It doesn't mean that every bathroom for example, is accessible because it doesn't really need to be. And I know that might be a long-winded answer to your question. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think it did.
Okay.
Okay. And I guess going along with that too, flipping through here, I noticed that elevators are in here, but maybe I just missed them in your presentation. Is that
Yeah.
part of the ADA concerns? Because I noticed in the assessment itself, one of them is.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that here tonight, but there are some mechanical issues with the elevator, I think, that need to be addressed. It's not likely that the elevator cab or the controls would comply with the accessibility regulations just based on the age of it. And the elevator is what provides the accessible route between floors. Other things are accessible routes, hallways, ramps, door openings, and so forth. An elevator is also an accessible route. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That is an important element. If we have a person who needs to travel, between floors during the school day, that would be an important thing to address.
Okay, thank you. One of the other questions I had is just based on age of building. Obviously, you don't know a lot of what's here necessarily until you start opening walls and things like that. But would you expect us to be finding asbestos or anything like that that's kind of hidden, not visible?
Yeah, it's possible that there's still asbestos left in the older portion of the building. I would not expect to find it anywhere in the new portion. But I know there were a lot of renovations done in the old portion of the building when the addition was put on. Some of it may have been addressed at that time. The common items that you would find are things like pipe insulation, but most of that stuff is above the ceiling. We don't see it, or it might be in a mechanical room, in which case we can see it. Other places is there, older types of vinyl floor tile that were made with asbestos. It's the smaller format tile. I think it's 9x9 or something. We see that in a lot of older buildings, but if it's not breaking up or cracking where the fibers become airborne, there's typically nothing that you need to do about it. But I would be shocked if there was no asbestos in the older portion of the building. It's somewhere.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is more of a curiosity question, I think, because you mentioned that you've been to a lot of different schools. Mm-hmm. Do a lot of buildings have, I'm going to call them the wave overhangs that we have out front? Because
the canopies?
I was going to say, I've heard a lot of parent and student complaints about them because during the winter they tend to store up ice and snow and then just dump it.
You're talking about the canopies at the gymnasium and the drop-off area?
And primarily the ones by the buses are the ones that I've heard the most complaints about.
Yeah, having a canopy is not unusual at all because, we want to protect people from the elements while they're waiting. That particular design, I think, probably could have been done differently because of the issues that you've raised. And that's a design issue, right? So maybe there were some choices made there that weren't the best.
That was a very polite way of putting that. Thank you.
I have to be diplomatic because these people are my colleagues too. So
I'd like to make one more point, if I would. I don't think the cost of materials, wood and electronics are going to come down in the near future. I think it's going to be well over a year before we see any lessening of prices. I know that this summer we went out shopping for a new vehicle, and we were told at one large dealership that they had no cars on the lot and that they had some coming in, maybe, and they couldn't tell us when, and they couldn't tell us what. How do you buy a car like that?
That's because of the steel.
Yeah, and the electronics.
Brian, could you comment, if you would, on the timeframe going forward that you and members of the committee may have discussed about the next steps in the process?
So I will reiterate what Narissa said. The committee is hearing this for the first time tonight along with you. They felt in our conversations, the committee felt strongly that the committee obviously has a vested interest in given their role in charge of our schools, but this is borne by the 3-member community. So I think the next This is weird. Do I have to be like a mile away? Can you hear me? I'll hold it. Sorry. So the next step, I think, is to have another district communications committee where we sit back around the square and have an active discussion about what we believe the next steps should be. There are certainly things that give us more pause than others with regard to what needs to be addressed more quickly. There are some things that since this report was written that we've addressed, obviously small potatoes, things that fit within the budget, items that we've been able to address with ESSER funding. But we have not, I would not even come close to saying we put any type of dent in any of the issues within this report. We're fixing minor items where we can as the general operating budget has been able to support that. So I think to answer the question, I think the next discussion it continues with the full district communications committee. And I again, can't reiterate enough, this is not a proposal, this is not a plan, this is not a statement to say, all right, towns, where are we going to find $58 million? This is here's what it costs to fix everything we know we need to fix. How do we want to approach this to find a long-term solution?
Actually, what you found is these are the deficiencies at the Triton Regional High School and Middle School, and what are we going to do about it?
I guess I'll just, I don't want to speak for Linda here, but I'll just kind of second what Brian said. So I know on the 25th, we have school committee discussion on the agenda to recap tonight because some of the members couldn't make it. And to just, if people have feedback, but I believe the intent was to set another DCC date and come back here. People have a chance to sit and truly digest everything that's in this report. And we have a conversation because 5-year capital plan needs to be developed. We have obviously some pressing needs. We know there are pressing needs, especially I know I've heard Brian say the word roof. I don't know how many times during my time as chair, there's an issue with the roof. So we need to sit and have those discussions. The committee, their school committees can sit and force things down their town's throat. We could take a vote, right? And we can send it over to the towns and you could decline it. It's not productive. So I think we need to sit and have these conversations. That's just my take. Sorry, Linda.
We're a school committee of 9, so any one of you can say what you want. I'm the chair, but I'm not one to overstep anybody. It's just something that has to be looked at, and we just all got to take it that something needs to be done. Some of the stuff is pressing. The roof, the drains, we had major issues and we're not even into winter yet. I'd also like to just say, we'd love to have this be a discussion among the towns at the next DCC meeting. I know that having this type of study is that put Newbury on a good course of knowing its capital plans, using it at Newbury Elementary to know what's coming up, what we need to be budgeting for, gives you a better context. Sitting in the dark without just saying, hey, we need a roof and we have no idea how much it's going to cost isn't helpful. This helps give us some context to those discussions and make it real. And it's definitely important if we're going to keep up the quality of the building. It's a lot, but we need to have, it's not a short-term fix, so I would like to discuss it.
Yeah, and the school committee's in this together with the towns. I mean, we need each other,
I have one housekeeping I need 5 more copies to take back with me since I'm the only one who showed up from Raleigh.
There are, I believe there are 35 bound copies. So certainly if you want to take them back to make sure each member of the select board, those that aren't here tonight, has a copy of that. And then there are some printed color copies if we run out of the bound copies. So certainly we assumed that each select board member would like his or her own copy to read in detail. So one more thing to say to the question, Neil. We're not coming this year to come ask for money. I mean, I think short term, there is nothing where we're saying, okay, we need to fix something immediately. And this is not, as Kevin mentioned, if we're going MSBA route, that's multiple years. If we're going capital planning, that's multiple years. So this isn't something where we're going to come to you in short order and say, hey, we need this amount of money. If there is an immediate need, we would find a way to address it through other resources at this time.
All right.
Linda, did you want to say anything, or want me to just wrap this up? I'm going to just wrap this up. So Kevin, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for the work that you and your team did. I also want to again reiterate Chris Walsh, who spent quality time with Kevin in following up, as well as the rest of our maintenance crews. As Kevin alluded to early on, this is about the age of the building. This is not about the lack of effort by Chris Walsh or any of the head custodians and custodial crews here who do great work. This is a big campus. And we have a handful of individuals who are trying to maintain this building. So again, this is the start of a much longer discussion. So I would say as far as next steps, I will work with Linda to schedule a DCC. I would suggest we schedule that, and the only topic on the agenda is this. And then we get back in our square roundtable discussion and start to make some decisions about how we do take the next step so that we can have a quality educational setting for our students. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. And we'll be in touch with the next date. Thank you.